Alright, today we're going to be going over component locations on one of our 1000 cc units. We're just going to start front to back. So beginning very front up here, we have your radiator. We also have your engine and transmission oil coolers mounted to the front. This silver bolt on top of the radiator, you'll reference our how to bleed the cooling system. This is the bolt you'll remove to bleed the air out of the cooling system. Alright, now down below the radiator, you will see plugged into the back here, that will be your temperature switch. Stepping over here to the side, we get a lot of questions on this. Your VIN plate will be located right here on this frame tubing running vertically. So if you ever need to reference the VIN, that's where it's located. We also have our two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive relay. Our receiver for our wireless winch remote. We have our air box, which contains the air filter. Our coolant reservoir. We also have our EPS controller. And then if we look down here, mounted to the firewall, as we say, is our EPS module. Down below here, we have our brake master cylinder. Tucked in underneath the back of the parking brake assembly, we have our brake micro switch. Down here underneath. Here we have our speed limiter. We also have our winch solenoid. And then down here, we also have our EPS motor as well. Here's one of our 2 points for adjusting our shift linkage. There's the forwardmost point, and then stepping back here by the transmission itself will be our second point of adjustment. All right, located inside the glove box, we have our wiring for our trickle charger. That's going to be a connector that fits your standard trickle charger. You'll also see our steering wheel lever down here underneath the steering column. And then on the key itself will be a little silver tag with a number stamped on it. If you ever lose your keys, you can call us and reference that number and we can send you out new keys. If you've misplaced this tag, you can always remove the plastic shroud from the column. It will be etched on the metal in the column as well. All right, now here on the instrument panel, just below the cluster, you'll have all of your switches. So this does anything from your turn signals and hazards. A feature that we wanted to discuss on this as well, being that it has a hydraulic dump bed lift, this switch here will actually lift and lower your cargo bed. And then of course, you've got your diff lock switch, two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, and so on. Down here we have our 3 pedals. We have our accelerator pedal, our primary brake pedal, and our secondary brake pedal, also referred to as the parking brake. And on the primary brake pedal, you'll also notice this little return spring and this cable down here. That is going to be your reverse interlock. Without depressing the brake pedal, it will not allow you to shift into reverse. We have this unit disassembled. However, on an assembled unit, you'll notice here underneath your feet, you'll see this little intake shroud. This is going to be your CVT intake. And then of course it just vents out the back there. We also have the battery compartment, and of course we have this unit stripped down, so there's no battery currently in it, but there are a lot of important components within this, namely the battery. This is where you'll find your battery and all of its connections. You also have your flame out box. So if you lose fire on one cylinder, this box will shut down the entire engine. We have your flasher relay. We have your fuse box. We have the main relay. our solenoid. We have this magnetic controller, which controls the diff lock. And then we have your hydraulic dump bed solenoid down here. Also located inside the engine compartment, you will find your voltage regulator. And again, this is where your stator will plug in. So for any stator testing, you'll want to remove the connector from the bottom of the voltage regulator. Mounted next to the voltage regulator is going to be your ECU. We have this little white connector, and this will be relatively hard to see. If you lift the bed on an installed unit, you'll notice this little white connector. That is going to be your diagnostic port connector. Going below that, we have your clutch box. That's where your clutches and your belt will be housed. All right, now a lot of folks always ask, where is the oil filter located? So on our V-twin models, this down here will be your oil filter housing. This does not take the standard metal spin-on filter. This is going to be the cartridge style filter that's housed in this metal housing. Stepping back from there, you will see your engine oil dipstick. Alright, now in front of your entire engine assembly will be your transmission. Located on top of the transmission will be your transmission oil dipstick. Below all of that, we have our water pump. In this metal housing contains your stator. Now you'll notice the wire loom coming up from your stator. This will run all the way to your voltage regulator. So once you find your voltage regulator, that's where you will test your stator at that connector. And then also down here, coming out of the stator housing, will be your crank sensor. So follow that wire to the connector for the crank sensor testing. All right, and of course, being that this is a V-twin, we'll have 2 cylinders, so we will have 2 fuel injectors right here in the top of each head. All right, now here, we have our air temp sensor. Inside of the engine compartment, this is relatively easy to see once you remove the access port underneath the seat. You'll notice we have our throttle body. Located on the throttle body, we will have our throttle position sensor. And then on the underside will be our idle air control valve, which is shaped roughly like a C-cell battery. Going back from there, we have our fuel filter, and of course our fuel pump and tank. Back here in the rear of the engine, it's kind of difficult to see, but mounted in the rear underneath cylinder 2 will be your starter. You can also see right here O2 sensor number 2, and then up here in the front, that is O2 sensor number 1. We will have 2 temperature sensors on this engine. One is located here, the other is located here in the rear. Alright, now as we were speaking earlier, there is a procedure on how to bleed the cooling system. We showed you the screw on the top of the radiator for bleeding on the front of the unit. These V-twins will have 2 screws in the rear of the unit for bleeder screws as well. One located here, and then one located here under this vent. Now mounted to the bottom of this round frame tubing will be ignition coil number 1 and ignition coil number 2. And you can always follow the wires to their respective spark plugs. But again, being that it's a V-twin, you'll have 2 spark plugs located here. And then for cylinder 2, located here. Located to the rear of cylinder 1 will be your timing chain tensioner. And then down below, if we look at the outside of the stator housing, we'll notice a round plug with a slot. That will be your timing mark port. Okay, down here to the rear of the engine, in front of the rear diff, you'll find your parking brake caliper. It will also have an adjustment screw, so the adjustment for the parking brake will be on the parking brake caliper itself. It's very important to pay attention to your serviceable grease fittings. This increases longevity for your bearings and overall smooth ride for the vehicle. You will find this is a main one here on this carrier bearing down below the engine compartment. That does have a grease zerk, and we do recommend greasing that per your service manual intervals. Also the drive shaft itself, and then the U-joints within the yokes all have serviceable grease fittings. Alright, so just wanted to briefly go over adjusting your shocks. You'll notice each shock has a gas canister attached. This smaller red nut here, you'll see it says slow and fast. This is for micro adjustment of the shocks. The red nut on top of the white spring is going to be for more major adjustments. And your toolkit that comes with the unit does also contain the spanner wrenches to adjust this nut. And again, as with the front shocks, the rear shock will have the smaller red micro adjustment, as well as the larger red major adjustment. And again, the toolkit that comes with the unit will contain the spanner wrenches to adjust this larger red nut. Alright, just wanted to go over briefly on how to drain and fill the front and rear differential. So being that we're at the front differential here, we will notice this silver nut right here at an angle coming out of the top. That is going to be your fill port. And then directly below, there is a cutout in the metal shrouding. That will be where you drain the front differential. Alright, now stepping back to the rear differential, this is a little bit more easy to access. You'll notice this silver nut right here, this silver bolt. You'll remove that to fill, and you'll just fill until it reaches that hole. And then also to drain, again, there will be a metal cutout down here on bottom, which will allow you to access the drain for the rear differential.